Welcome to Sleepy Crimes. I am Anna, your host. Tonight, we drift into the shadows of the Memphre Lake mystery. Imagine, if you will, a vast stretch of water that does not belong to just one land. Lake Memphremagog. It is a glacial remnant. A deep, cold finger of water reaching 30 miles across the border between the green hills of Vermont and the rolling landscape of Quebec. The name itself is an ancient breath, derived from the Abenaki word for where there is a big expanse of water. It is a place of absolute, crushing stillness, where the surface can look like a polished sheet of obsidian under the moonlight. The water here is not merely deep. It plunges down more than 351 feet into a darkness that has not seen the sun for 10,000 years. When the wind dies down at the end of a long day, the lake becomes a mirror, reflecting the towering silhouette of Owl's Head Mountain. But mirrors can be deceptive. Beneath that silvered surface, the currents move with a slow, heavy intent, and the locals have long whispered that something else moves with them. For centuries, the indigenous people of the region spoke of a great serpent, a creature they were careful not to disturb. They knew the water's weight and its secrets long before the first settlers arrived with their iron tools and their skepticism. Tonight, we go back to the time when those whispers turned into a modern haunting. In the early years of the 20th century, the lake was a different world. It was a time of grand hotels and slow-moving steamships. The air around the water smelled of cedar smoke, damp earth, and the faint, sweet scent of pine needles drying in the sun. Travelers would arrive at the grand resorts like the Mountain House, their heavy wool coats and leather trunks a testament to a slower pace of life. They came for the air and the scenery, but they also came for the silence. Yet even then, the silence was not entirely empty. In those early 1900s, a specific kind of dread began to take root in the small fishing communities that dotted the shoreline. The fishermen were men of few words, their hands calloused by years of pulling hemp nets and rowing heavy wooden dories. They knew every cove, every submerged rock, and every rhythm of the weather. They understood how the light changed at dusk, turning the water from a bright, translucent teal to a deep, bruising violet. They knew when the lake was giving and when it was holding its breath. It was on one such evening, in the year 1907, that the modern mystery of Memphre truly began to stir from the depths of local legend into a chilling reality. The sky was a pale, washed-out orange, and the water was so still that a single falling leaf could be heard as it touched the surface. There was a man, a local fisherman whose name has been smoothed over by the passage of time, though some still call him Elias. He was a man of habit, a fixture of the Newport docks. Every afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent behind the western peaks, Elias would load his boat. You can almost feel the texture of the scene, the rough, weathered grain of his oars, the cool dampness of the moss growing on the dock pylons, and the rhythmic creak of the wood as he stepped into his small, sturdy craft. He was not a man prone to flights of fancy. He was a creature of the elements. On this particular evening, his neighbors watched him row out toward the center of the lake, his silhouette growing smaller and smaller against the glowing horizon. The sound of his oars clicking in the brass oarlocks echoed across the water, a steady, comforting heartbeat in the cooling air. The smell of the water was sharp and metallic, the way it often is just before the night chills settles in. He was headed toward a spot where the shelf drops off into the deepest part of the basin, a place where the fish were known to hide in the cold, dark shadows. As the light began to fail, the violet shadows of the mountains stretched out across the water, reaching for him like long, dark fingers. The transition from day to night on Lake Memphremagog is a sensory experience that feels like a heavy blanket being pulled over the world. The sounds of the shore, the distant barking of a dog, the clatter of a wagon, fade away, replaced by the profound hum of the wilderness. Elias was a mile from the shore when the ripples began. They were not the usual ripples caused by a rising trout or a sudden gust of wind. These were heavy, rhythmic swells that seemed to originate from deep beneath his boat. Witnesses on a distant pier later described seeing the water begin to churn in a way that defied the calm of the air. It was as if the lake itself were breathing. The surface didn't break at first. It simply rose and fell in large, smooth humps. There was no splashing, no violent thrashing. Just a silent, powerful displacement of water that caused Elia's boat to rock gently, then more violently. The violet light of the sky was reflecting off the swells, creating a hypnotic, shimmering pattern of light and dark. In that moment, the air reportedly went deathly silent. Even the loons, usually so vocal at dusk, were quiet. The lake had become a stage for something ancient, something that had been waiting in the 300 feet of darkness below. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving only a thin, bruised line of red along the crest of the hills, the ripples stopped. The lake returned to its glass-like state, as if nothing had happened. But when the moon rose an hour later, casting a pale, ghostly light across the water, the fisherman's boat was no longer where it had been. It was found the next morning, drifting aimlessly near Province Island, where the international border cuts through the water. The boat was perfectly intact. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken oars, and no water in the hull. Elia's pipe was resting on the bench, and his hat was tucked neatly under the seat, as if he had simply stepped out of the boat into the air. But there were no footprints on the shore, and no body was ever recovered from the depths. The search parties spent days rowing over the spot where he was last seen, peering into the sunless water with lanterns and long poles. They found nothing but the cold, endless blue. It was then that the old stories began to resurface, tales of a creature that didn't just swim, but claimed the lake as its own. This wasn't just a disappearance, it was a threshold. The townspeople began to look at those ripples at dusk not as a natural occurrence, but as a warning. The mystery of Memphre had officially moved from the realm of campfire stories into the waking world, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the water itself. The boat glides forward, its hull slicing through the water with a sound like tearing silk. Here, in the middle of Lake Memphremagog, the surface is a mirror of hammered silver, reflecting the heavy, low-hanging clouds of a Vermont twilight. You are moving north, leaving the docks of Newport behind. Beneath you, the lake bed is a gentle slope of sand and silt, barely 20 feet below the keel. But as you progress, the landscape underwater begins to shift. There is no rope across the waves, no floating wall to mark the transition, yet you are approaching a threshold that has defined lives for over 200 years. The air grows noticeably cooler as the wind picks up off the slopes of Owl's Head, a mountain that looms 3,360 feet above the western shore, its peak often lost in a crown of mist. Suddenly, the depth finder begins to flicker. The floor of the lake falls away with terrifying speed. You have crossed the invisible line. You are no longer in the United States. You have entered the Canadian reaches of the lake. Here, the water plunges to 351 feet deep. It is a cold, dark abyss where the sun's rays never reach, a place where the pressure is immense and the secrets are many. The water here is different. It is a bruised purple in the shadows, heavy with the weight of the unknown. To your right lies Province Island, a long, narrow strip of land that seems to float on the water like a sleeping creature. It is one of 21 islands scattered across this glacial expanse, but it holds a unique distinction. A single, straight line, the 45th parallel, slices through its southern tip. Only about 1/10 of the island belongs to the United States, while the rest is claimed by Quebec. If you were to walk its shores, you might stumble upon a granite marker, a cold, moss-covered pillar of stone that stands as a silent sentry to the border. These markers are scattered all along the international line, some hidden deep in the thickets of pine and cedar, others standing exposed on rocky outcrops. They are weathered by a century of harsh winters and humid summers, their inscriptions worn smooth by the fingers of travelers and the lashing of the rain. There is a strange, quiet tension in the air around these stones. They represent a boundary that is both absolute and entirely imagined. In the woods nearby, the trees grow thick and tangled, their branches interlacing across the line as if they do not recognize the laws of men. The scent of damp earth and rotting needles is thick here, a primal smell that reminds you how thin the veneer of civilization really is in this borderland. This lake has always been a corridor for those who wish to remain unseen. During the 1920s, when the United States was gripped by the fever of prohibition, Memphremagog became a highway for the daring. Under the cover of a moonless night, high-speed boats, some equipped with surplus airplane engines, would roar across the water, their hulls weighted down with crates of Canadian whiskey and ale. These were the whiskey runners, men who knew every cove and every hidden inlet of these 31 miles of water. They played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the revenuers and the border patrol. Some of these smuggling vessels were ingenious, designed with special underwater shelves along the bow. If a government boat began to gain on them, the smugglers would pull a lever, releasing the crates into the dark depths of the lake. The evidence would vanish into the silt, leaving the runners to claim they were merely out for a midnight pleasure cruise. Even today, divers occasionally find the remains of these discarded cargoes, the glass bottles still sealed, resting in the freezing mud of the lake bed, waiting for a toast that will never come. The sounds of those engines have long since faded, replaced by the soft lapping of the waves, but the history of the illicit trade is etched into the very map of the region. One of the most legendary haunts of these border crossers is Skinner's Cave, located on the western shore. It is a jagged, dark opening in the rock that looks like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. Legend tells of a smuggler named Skinner who lived in the early 1800s. He was said to be a giant of a man, elusive and cunning, who used the cave to store his contraband and hide from the authorities. The cave is a damp, claustrophobic space where the walls weep with groundwater and the floor is slick with algae. When the wind blows from the north, it whistles through the cracks in the stone, sounding like a ghostly voice calling out from the past. It is easy to imagine Skinner huddled there in the darkness, listening for the splash of an oar or the snap of a twig. The cave is a reminder that the border has always been a place of shadows, where the law is something that can be stepped over as easily as a fallen log. The silence inside the cave is absolute, a heavy, ringing quiet that makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum. It is the kind of place where time seems to stand still, and the ghosts of the old runners feel close enough to touch. In more recent years, the shadows of the border have taken on a different, more somber tone. The smuggling of goods has, at times, been replaced by the smuggling of people. On cold winter nights, when the lake is frozen 3 feet thick, figures can be seen moving across the ice, their breath blooming in the air like white ghosts. They move between the towns of Darby Line in Vermont and Stansted in Quebec, 2 communities so closely entwined that a single building, the Haskell Free Library and Opera House, actually sits on the border. Inside that building, a thick black line is painted across the floor, separating the 2 nations. It is a place where you can stand with 1 foot in the United States and the other in Canada, a geographical curiosity that belies the very real dangers of the crossing. Outside, in the rural stretches of the border, the terrain is unforgiving. Forested hills and waist-high wetlands provide cover for those trying to bypass the official checkpoints. Border patrol boats now lurk behind pine-covered islands, their lights extinguished, their crews watching the radar screens for any sign of movement. The tension is palpable, a silent vibration in the air that tells you are being watched, even when no one is in sight. But perhaps the greatest mystery of the international line is not what happens on the surface, but what dwells beneath. The deep, central basin of the lake is a world unto itself, a place of extreme cold and darkness. It is here that the legend of Memphre, the lake's own sea serpent, resides. Sightings of the creature date back to the early 19th century, with witnesses describing a long-necked, serpentine being that moves with a grace that defies explanation. Is it a remnant of a prehistoric age, trapped in this glacial finger lake when the ice retreated 9,500 years ago? Or is it a projection of the secrets we bury in the water? The lake has swallowed more than just whiskey crates. It has claimed training planes from the 1940s and countless vessels that ventured out too far in a storm. The depth of 351 feet is a graveyard of things lost and forgotten. As the mist rolls in across the border, obscuring the granite markers and the distant lights of Magog, the lake seems to expand, becoming the great expanse of water its name implies. The line between the two countries disappears in the fog, leaving only the water, the dark, and the enduring mystery of what lies at the bottom. The depth of the central basin holds a stillness that feels heavy, as if the water itself is pressing down on centuries of secrets. To understand what the early inhabitants of this land felt when they looked upon the silvered surface of Lake Memphremagog, one must imagine a world before the hum of modern life, where the only sounds were the rustle of white pines and the rhythmic lap of waves against jagged granite. Long before the first European settlers arrived with their heavy iron tools and leather-bound journals, the Abenaki people moved through these woods with a profound, quiet respect for the water. They called it the beautiful waters, yet their reverence was tinged with a specific, chilling fear. They spoke of a creature that lived in the dark, sunless voids beneath the surface, a water boa or anaconda of impossible proportions. Their warnings to the newcomers were simple and direct. Do not bathe in these waters, for the serpent is always watching. Imagine the settlers, tired from their journey through the thick Vermont wilderness, standing at the shoreline. The air would have smelled of damp cedar and cool moss. They might have reached down to splash the cold water on their faces, only to pause as they saw the reflection of the ancient forest shiver and break. In those moments, the silence of the lake was not peaceful. It was a physical weight, a warning that they were guests in a territory that belonged to something much older and far less hospitable. The first official forensic entry in the Ledger of the Unknown was recorded in the year 1816. It was a year of biting cold, remembered by many as the year without a summer, where frost clung to the grass even in the heart of July. Perhaps it was this strange, unnatural chill that drew the creature from the warmer vents of the lake floor. 8 individuals, including a man named Uriah Jewett and his companions, stood on the shore near Georgeville and witnessed something that defied the logic of the natural world. They described a serpent 30 feet in length, cutting through the water with a terrifying grace. Its head was said to be shaped like that of a horse, held high above the waterline, its eyes dark and unblinking. But there was another report from that same year, tucked away in the dusty corners of history, that offered an even more jarring detail. Some witnesses claimed the beast possessed 12 to 15 pairs of legs, moving like a giant, submerged centipede through the glacial depths. Picture the scene through their eyes. The gray sky hanging low over the water, the surface as smooth as polished lead, and then a sudden, violent wake. The sound would not have been a splash, but a heavy, rolling churn. The smell of the lake would have changed, shifting from the sweet scent of rain to something briny and ancient, as if the bottom of the world had suddenly been turned upward. For decades, these stories lived only in the hushed conversations of lakeside taverns and the private pages of family diaries. It was not until the year 1847 that the legend truly transitioned into a public record. In the town of Stansted, a printer's office hummed with the smell of fresh ink and the clatter of a heavy press. The Stansted Journal published a report on January 21st, stating plainly that a strange animal, something of a sea serpent, existed in Lake Memphremagog. This was no longer a ghost story whispered by a flickering fire. It was a matter of public inquiry. One of the most significant pieces of evidence from this era was not a photograph, but a journal written by Ralph Mary IV. His words remained hidden for over a century, tucked beneath the floorboards of his home in Magog, surviving the dampness of the earth and the passage of time. When the floorboards were finally pried up in 1969, the journal revealed eyewitness accounts from those early 1800s that perfectly matched the modern descriptions. The consistency across generations is a chilling hallmark of the Memphre mystery. Whether the witness was a 19th century farmer or a 20th century traveler, the details remain the same. A dark, sleek body, multiple humps breaking the surface like the coils of a giant rope, and a speed that no known animal in these waters could possibly achieve. The water closes over it, leaving behind only the ripples and the unsettling realization that the eyes of the lake are never truly closed. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the sightings did not fade. They became more frequent, more detailed, and more difficult to dismiss. The investigation took on a forensic quality through the work of Dr. Jacques Boisvert, a man who would eventually be known as the world's first dracontologist. Boisvert was not a man of idle fantasy. He was a diver, a historian, and an ecologist who submerged himself in the lake over 7,000 times. He treated every sighting as a crime scene, a data point in a vast, invisible map of the creature's movements. In 1961, 2 fishermen described a black creature, 40 feet long, that glided past their boat with such force it created a wake like a motorboat. They felt the vibration in the hull of their small craft, a low-frequency thrum that resonated in their very bones. Then, in 1994, 4 people in 2 separate boats reported a 30-foot-long, 3-humped creature moving silently near the international border. They watched, frozen, as the humps submerged one by one, leaving the water as still as a mirror. The silence that follows such a sighting is said to be absolute. The birds in the nearby trees go quiet, and the wind seems to hold its breath. You can almost feel the presence of the mass beneath you. 1,000 tons of ancient muscle and dark skin, drifting through the cold, lightless tunnels of the lake's deepest trenches, waiting for the next moment of perfect stillness to rise once more. The forensic file of Memphre continues to grow even in the 21st century. On a warm August evening in 1997, a witness near the Three Sisters Islands managed to capture a photograph of a disturbance that seemed to defy the wind's direction. Later, in June of the year 2000, 3 individuals encountered a 75-foot serpent in Sargent's Bay. They described the skin as being a deep, matte black, almost like wet rubber, reflecting no light from the setting sun. The head, they noted, was definitely horse-like, with a long, tapering neck that rose 5 feet out of the water. They watched as it dove, not with a splash, but by slipping beneath the surface with a terrifyingly efficient downward arc. To study these reports is to realize that we are not looking at a single creature, but a legacy. The leaden waters of Lake Memphremagog serve as a veil between our world of logic and a darker, older world of instinct. Even now, as the moon rises over Owl's Head Mountain and casts long, distorted shadows across the bay, the water remains an enigma. The legend and the lead-colored waves are inseparable, a mystery that is as much a part of the landscape as the granite cliffs and the deep, glacial silt. We look at the lake and see beauty. We look deeper, and we see the possibility of something that has survived the ages, hidden in the shadows of the international line, forever out of reach of our nets and our certainties. The transition from the grainy, flickering memories of witnesses to the cold, hard precision of digital data marked a turning point in the chronicle of Lake Memphremagog. As the 1990s reached their midpoint, the hunt for the elusive creature moved beneath the waves, away from the flickering flashbulbs of shorebound tourists and into the quiet, humming world of underwater acoustics. Imagine standing on the deck of a research vessel as the sun begins its slow descent behind the jagged silhouettes of the Appalachian Mountains. The air is turning sharp and cool, carrying the scent of damp pine needles and the metallic tang of the lake's surface. Below the hull, the water is a deep, impenetrable indigo, a liquid mass that hides its secrets with a heavy, crushing silence. The researchers on board move with a hushed, focused energy, their boots thumping softly on the fiberglass deck as they prepare to deploy the sonar arrays. This was no longer a game of chance sightings. It was a systematic attempt to map the darkness of the trenches that carve through the lake floor like ancient, flooded scars. Central to this technical crusade was a man whose name became synonymous with the mystery itself, Jacques Boisvert. He was not merely a theorist. He was a man of the water, a diver who plunged into the freezing depths more than 7,000 times over the course of his long, dedicated life. Imagine the sensation of the cold lake water pressing against a thick neoprene suit, the rhythmic, metallic hiss of a respirator echoing in the ears. To dive into Memphremagog is to enter a world of rapidly fading light, where the temperature drops in sudden, bone-chilling layers called thermoclines. At 30 feet, the sun is a pale, flickering memory. At 60 feet, the world turns into a monochromatic green haze. Boisvert sought the creature in its own domain, navigating the jagged rock formations and the thick, milky clouds of silt that rise from the bottom like ghosts at the slightest touch. His dedication was a testament to the weight of the evidence. For a man does not return to the dark 7,000 times unless he believes there is something waiting in the shadows to be found. Inside the cramped cabin of the research boat, the atmosphere is thick with the smell of warm electronics and the low, steady drone of a diesel generator. The centerpiece of the investigation is the sonar screen, a glowing emerald portal into the abyss. Each pulse sent from the transducer travels down through the water column at 5,000 feet per second, a sound wave searching for a solid surface to strike. On the monitor, the lake floor appears as a jagged, glowing line of white and yellow, but it is what floats above the bottom that catches the breath of the observers. In the late 1990s, technical teams began to record anomalies that defied simple explanation. They were not the scattered, chaotic echoes of a school of perch, nor the static, vertical lines of submerged timber. Instead, the screen revealed long, serpentine shapes, sometimes measuring 30 or 40 feet in length, gliding through the midwater with a grace that suggested muscle and intent. The room falls silent as a single, undulating silhouette appears on the scrolling display, its form echoing the very descriptions given by the Abenaki people centuries before. The technical investigation focused heavily on the deepest reaches of the lake, particularly the underwater trenches near the international border that plunge to depths of 350 feet. In these lightless canyons, the pressure is immense, and the water remains at a constant, shivering temperature just above freezing. Divers who ventured into these areas spoke of a profound sense of isolation, a feeling of being a small, fragile interloper in a vast and ancient cathedral of stone and silt. The sonar would often pick up massive, cavernous openings along the trench walls, spaces large enough to hide a creature of immense proportions. These underwater caves, carved by the slow, relentless power of prehistoric glaciers, created a labyrinth that made a physical encounter nearly impossible. As the sonar chirped its rhythmic, digital song, the scientists documented over 215 well-documented sightings by the year 1997, many of which were now backed by these strange, scrolling echoes of something moving through the deep. There is a specific kind of tension that exists when the data suggests a presence that the eyes cannot yet see. The specialized diving teams used high-intensity lights that cut through the murk like brilliant, white swords, but even the strongest beams were swallowed by the lake's natural turbidity after only a few yards. They searched for physical traces, a discarded scale, a disturbance in the silt, or a bone resting in the mud. But the lake floor is a restless place, covered in a fine, powdery sediment that can bury a secret in a matter of hours. The sonar anomalies continued to haunt the researchers, appearing as large, solid masses that would hover in the deep trenches for several minutes before suddenly accelerating and vanishing from the range of the sensors. These movements were too fast for a school of fish and too deliberate for a drifting log. Each ping of the sonar was a question sent into the dark, and while the echoes returned with a shape, the true nature of the sender remained cloaked in the cold, silent currents of the borderland waters. The sonar screen remains a flat, emerald glow against the darkening velvet of the cabin, showing nothing but the steady, rhythmic pulse of the lake floor. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that settles into the bones after days spent staring into the void, a heavy, quiet weight that matches the pressure of the water 351 feet below the hull. In this deep, glacial basin of Lake Memphremagog, the silence is not just a lack of sound, it is a presence in itself. We find ourselves drifting into the realm of the evidence of absence, a place where the lack of a discovery begins to tell a story of its own. It is a story not of a physical beast with scales and fins, but of the human mind and its relentless, beautiful need to fill the empty spaces with meaning. The water here is cold, holding a temperature that clings to the low 30s even in the height of summer, and as the mist begins to curl off the surface like ghostly ribbons, the line between reality and imagination starts to blur. You can smell the sharp, clean scent of cedar and damp earth carried on the breeze, a scent that has lingered over these waters for 11,000 years, since the glaciers first retreated and left this massive tear in the earth. It is easy, in this stillness, to understand why the legends took root here, growing as thick and tangled as the weeds in the shallows. Psychologists often speak of pareidolia, that ancient survival mechanism that forces our brains to find patterns where none exist. We see faces in the clouds and predators in the swaying tall grass. On the water, this phenomenon is amplified by the shifting play of light and shadow. Imagine a long, weathered log, perhaps a century-old hemlock, that has finally surrendered its grip on the shoreline. It floats just beneath the surface, dark and slick. As a boat passes a mile away, its wake travels across the glass-like surface, eventually reaching the log. The water lifts the wood, giving it a slow, undulating motion that looks remarkably like a serpentine back breaking the surface. To a witness standing on a distant pier in the fading light of 1816, this was not a piece of timber. It was a creature with 12 or 15 pairs of legs, a terrifying anomaly in a world that was already full of wonders. We want to see. We want the world to be larger and more mysterious than the maps suggest. This deep-seated desire creates a psychological filter, turning a swimming moose or a school of large walleye into a prehistoric survivor. The eye captures the movement, but the heart provides the monster. Few people understood this delicate balance better than Jacques Boisvert. In 1986, he founded the Dracontology Society, a group dedicated to the formal study of the creature they called Memphre. Boisvert was a man of the water, a seasoned scuba diver who spent thousands of hours suspended in the weightless, green gloom of the lake. He was a meticulous archivist, documenting over 200 distinct sightings with the patience of a saint. He listened to the stories of fishermen, tourists, and locals with an open mind, yet he never once claimed to have seen the creature himself. There is something profoundly poetic about a man dedicating his life to a mystery he could never quite touch. He swam through the submerged forests and over the silty plains of the lake bed, his flashlight cutting through the dark, looking for a bone, a tooth, or even a strange disturbance in the sediment. But the lake kept its secrets close. The forensic reality of the environment is a harsh critic. In a body of water this size, a breeding population of large animals would leave a biological trail. There would be carcasses that wash ashore, skeletal remains resting in the deep, and a consistent disruption of the food chain that would be visible to modern science. Yet, the nets come up empty, and the cameras record only the drifting silt and the occasional curious fish. The absence of evidence is often dismissed as a lack of effort, but in the case of Lake Memphremagog, the effort has been monumental. We have scanned the depths with multi-beam sonar and sent remote-operated vehicles into the narrowest crevices of the underwater cliffs. We have mapped the thermal layers where a cold-blooded creature might seek warmth. What we find instead is a pristine, silent world that operates on a timeline far older than human memory. The lake is a closed system, a liquid vault. If a creature truly lived here, it would be a ghost of the Jurassic, a plesiosaur trapped in a glacial tomb. But the biology of such a thing is nearly impossible to reconcile with the nutrient levels of the water. To sustain a beast of 20 feet in length, the lake would need a massive surplus of prey, a chaotic churn of life that simply isn't there. Instead, we have the quiet. We have the soft lapping of waves against the hull and the distant cry of a loon. The mystery survives not because of what we have found, but because of what we haven't. The empty space on the map is where our stories live. Even the Canadian government acknowledged the cultural weight of this absence when they issued a special 25-cent coin in 2011, featuring the image of Memphre. It was a recognition that some things are more valuable as myths than as facts. A captured creature is a specimen to be measured and categorized, but a hidden one is a legend that can last forever. As we look at the hoaxes and the misidentifications, the boat wakes mistaken for humps, the floating debris seen as a long neck, we see a reflection of our own longing. We are a species that fears the dark, yet we are drawn to it. We find comfort in the idea that there are still places where the light of science hasn't reached, where something ancient and unknown might still be gliding through the shadows. The forensic truth may be a lake of cold water and empty caves, but the psychological truth is a lake teeming with the ghosts of our ancestors' fears. We continue to watch the surface, not because we expect to see a monster, but because we are afraid of what it would mean if the water were truly, finally empty. The search continues, driven by the quiet hope that the data is wrong and the stories are right. The moon hangs like a pale, silver coin over the obsidian glass of Lake Memphremagog. Here, at the water's edge, the world feels thin, as if the boundary between the known and the unknowable is nothing more than a curtain of rising mist. The air is thick with the scent of damp pine needles and the cold, metallic tang of wet slate. Every few seconds, the surface of the lake exhales, sending a rhythmic lap of water against the smooth, gray stones at your feet. It is a soft, hollow sound, like the heartbeat of something very large and very old, resting just out of sight. The towering silhouette of Owl's Head Mountain stands as a sentinel on the western shore, its peak draped in a heavy, violet shadow that seems to watch over the depths with a somber, ancient patience. We have spent our time tracing the ripples left by a shadow, following the whispers of 1816 and the long, winding tailies of those who claim to see the impossible. But as the night deepens, we must look beyond the sightings and the grainy photographs. We must look at the silence itself and what it means to live alongside a mystery that refuses to be solved. In the quiet town of Magog, the legacy of one man remains intertwined with the cold currents of the lake. Jacques Boisfort was not merely a diver. He was a bridge between our world and the world beneath the waves. Over the course of his long life, he descended into the emerald gloom more than 6,000 times. Imagine the weight of the water pressing against his suit, the muffled roar of his own breath in the regulator, and the endless, murky vastness stretching out in every direction. He ran his fingers over the silt of the lake bed, discovering forgotten tobacco pipes, clay vases that had waited 1,000 years to be touched again, and the rusted remains of boats that the lake had long ago claimed as its own. He founded the International Dracontology Society, a name that sounds like something pulled from a dusty leather-bound grimoire. To Jacques, the search for Memphre was not an obsession of madness, but a quest of profound respect. He once felt a log beneath his hand move with a sudden, powerful life, vanishing into a cloud of sediment before he could truly see it. When he passed away in February of 2006, he left behind a world that was a little more magical for his belief. He never captured the creature in a net, but he captured the imagination of two nations, proving that some secrets are meant to be guarded rather than exposed. Beneath the surface where the recreational boats bob in the sunlight, there is a landscape of terrifying beauty. The lake is a long, finger-like scar in the earth, carved by the slow, crushing power of glaciers 11,000 years ago. In its deepest heart, the bottom drops away to 351 feet. At that depth, the water is a constant, bone-chilling cold, and the pressure is a silent, physical force. It is a world of absolute midnight, where the pressure and the dark create a sanctuary for things that do not wish to be found. For over 2 centuries, more than 215 documented sightings have flickered like candles in the dark. People describe a serpent with 12 pairs of legs, or a dark hump like the back of a whale, or a creature with the head of a horse rising gracefully from the foam. These stories are not just tall tales told by fishermen over glasses of amber ale. They are the ways in which we process the sheer scale of the unknown. The Algonquin name for this place translates to a large expanse of water, and that expanse is as much psychological as it is physical. It is a canvas where we paint our wonders and our fears, a silent guardian of the things we cannot quite explain. The Canadian government eventually turned the legend into something tangible, pressing the likeness of the creature into a 25-cent coin in 2011. It was a gesture of recognition for a shadow. The coin shows the beast as a majestic, multi-humped serpent, moving through the water with a quiet dignity. It is a strange thing to hold a piece of currency that honors a myth, but it speaks to the power of folklore to shape our reality. The creature, whether it is a relic of a prehistoric age, a giant sturgeon, or simply the play of light and wind on the water, has become a vital part of the cultural tapestry of Quebec and Vermont. It brings people to the shores to gaze out with binoculars, their hearts skipping a beat when a stray log catches the light. This collective watchfulness creates a community of dreamers. The lake is not just a body of water used for hydroelectric power or fishing. It is a living entity, a character in our shared history that demands our attention and our awe. The mystery of Memphre persists because the lake itself provides the perfect stage for it. It is deep enough to hide a monster and beautiful enough to make us want to find one. As the investigation comes to a close, we find that there is no final evidence to present, no skeleton in a museum, and no definitive sonar sweep that can put the legend to rest. And perhaps that is the most comforting conclusion of all. In a world that is increasingly mapped, monitored, and measured, Lake Memphremagog remains a holdout. It is a place where the map still has a small corner that says, "Here there be dragons." The cold case of the lake's many secrets is not a failure of science, but a triumph of the mysterious. It reminds us to stay humble, to remember that we do not know everything that lurks in the deep, dark places of the earth. When the wind picks up and the water begins to churn into whitecaps, we can choose to see only the physics of the storm, or we can choose to see the shifting coils of the silent guardian. The legend of Memphre lives in that choice. It lives in the quiet moments of wonder when we stand on the shore and feel the immense, ancient scale of the world. The lake will continue to freeze in the winter, the ice growing 3 feet thick, and the creature, real or imagined, will wait beneath the frost for the spring to return. It is a cycle of mystery that will outlast us all. The lights in the houses along the shore are flickering out now, one by one. The mountains have faded into a velvet blackness that blends seamlessly with the sky. Only the stars remain, reflected in the still water like 1,000 tiny diamonds scattered across the abyss. The cold, crisp air settles over your shoulders like a heavy blanket, and the world grows very, very still. The ripples have smoothed away, leaving the lake as perfect and unreadable as it was 10,000 years ago. We leave the secrets where they belong, cradled in the deep silt and the freezing currents, guarded by the spirit of the water. There is nothing left to solve and nothing left to fear. The story is complete and the night is yours. The case rests now. Let the details fade. You are safe. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and have a good night. Sleep well.